The shovel struck hard earth one final time, and Henry Lawson's hands bled through the worn leather of his work gloves as he patted down the last mound of dirt over his brother's grave. They had ridden together for 23 years, from Texas all the way to the California territories, and now Thomas lay cold beneath the unforgiving ground just outside of Winnetka, a dusty settlement that seemed to exist only to swallow men whole and spit out their bones. The fever had taken Thomas in 4 days, turning his strong body into a shaking, sweating wreck that no doctor could save, and Henry had watched helplessly as the only family he had left slipped away into darkness. He stood there in the scorching August heat of 1878, hat in hand, staring at the crude wooden cross he had hammered together from spare planks, and felt something inside himself break clean through like a bone snapping under too much weight. He mounted his horse without looking back, leaving the grave and the town behind him as the sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky. The animal beneath him, a sturdy roan mare named Juniper, seemed to sense his aimlessness and walked without direction, following the dusty roads that spider-webbed through the California hills. Henry had no destination, no plan, no reason to go anywhere in particular. Thomas had been the one with dreams and schemes, always talking about finding gold or starting a ranch or making something of themselves out west. Henry had simply followed, content to ride beside his younger brother and keep him out of trouble. Now there was no one to follow, no one to protect, no purpose to any of it. Days blurred together as he wandered. He slept under stars that offered no comfort, ate sparingly from his dwindling supplies, and spoke to no one. The towns he passed through were forgettable places with forgettable names, each one a collection of false-fronted buildings and hard-eyed people who wanted nothing to do with a drifting cowboy with hollow eyes and dirt under his fingernails. He thought about turning around, going back to Texas, but there was nothing there either, except more ghosts and more memories he did not want to face. It was on a Wednesday morning, nearly 3 weeks after burying Thomas, that Henry found himself on a narrow road that cut through golden hills dotted with oak trees. His canteen was almost empty, his food was gone, and Juniper was moving slower than usual, her head hanging low with exhaustion. He knew he needed to find a town soon, get supplies, rest the horse, but the thought of interacting with other human beings felt like trying to lift a boulder with his bare hands. Still, necessity was a harsh master, and he urged Juniper forward with a gentle squeeze of his legs. The ranch appeared like a mirage in the afternoon heat, a modest spread with a white-painted house, a red barn that had seen better days, and fences that looked like they needed mending. Cattle grazed in the distance, and chickens scratched in the dirt near the house. Henry hesitated at the edge of the property, unsure whether to approach or keep riding, but his thirst made the decision for him. He guided Juniper up the long drive, noting the way the place seemed well kept, despite obvious signs of struggle, as if someone was fighting hard to maintain order against overwhelming odds. A woman emerged from the house before he reached it, wiping her hands on her apron and shading her eyes against the sun to get a better look at him. She was younger than he expected, maybe 25 or 26, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that would have been beautiful if not for the lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes and mouth. She did not reach for a weapon, but she did not smile either, just stood on the porch and waited for him to state his business. Henry pulled Juniper to a stop, a respectful distance away, and touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, I apologize for the intrusion. I am wondering if I might trouble you for some water. For myself and my horse. I can pay." The woman studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes taking in his dusty clothes, his worn saddle, the way he sat slumped in exhaustion. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded once and gestured toward the water trough near the barn. "Water is free. There is a pump if the trough is not fresh enough for you." "The trough is fine. Thank you kindly." Henry dismounted, his legs nearly buckling from the hours in the saddle, and led Juniper to the water. The horse drank gratefully while he used the pump to fill his canteen and then cupped his hands under the stream to splash water on his face and neck. The coolness was a blessing, washing away some of the dust and despair that had settled on him like a second skin. When he looked up, the woman had come down from the porch and was standing closer, her arms crossed over her chest in a posture that was not quite defensive but certainly guarded. "You look like you have been riding hard and long." "I suppose I have?" Henry's voice came out rougher than he intended, raw from disuse. I am grateful for the water. Where are you headed? The question should have been simple, but Henry found himself unable to answer. Where was he headed? Nowhere, anywhere. It did not matter. He looked down at his boots, at the dusty ground, and finally met her eyes again. I do not rightly know, madam. I have been drifting. Something in her expression softened, just a fraction. That is a dangerous way to live out here. A man without direction tends to find trouble whether he is looking for it or not. I suppose that is true. He paused, then added, I buried my brother a few weeks back. He was all the family I had. I have been trying to figure out what comes next. The woman's face changed completely then, the guardedness falling away to reveal sympathy and understanding. I am sorry for your loss. I know what it is to lose someone and feel like the world has stopped making sense. She was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. My name is Lillian Foster. This is my ranch. What is left of it? Henry Lawson. He felt like he should say more, offer more. But the words would not come. Lillian tilted her head, considering him with those penetrating blue eyes. Have you eaten today, Henry Lawson? No, madam. Ran out of supplies yesterday. Come inside. I have stew on the stove and more than enough for two. When he hesitated, she added, It is not charity. I have a proposition for you, if you are interested in hearing it. Henry's curiosity was piqued despite himself. He secured Juniper to a post with access to the water trough and followed Lillian into the house. The interior was clean and simply furnished, with handmade curtains on the windows and a table that looked like it had been built by someone who knew what they were doing. Photographs lined the mantel above the fireplace, showing a younger Lillian with a tall man who had kind eyes and a strong jawline. Lillian followed his gaze and said quietly, That was my husband, Daniel. He died 6 months ago. Horse threw him, and he hit his head on a rock. He was gone before I could even get him back to the house. I am sorry. Me too. She moved to the stove and began ladling thick stew into 2 bowls. The smell made Henry's stomach clench with hunger, reminding him just how long it had been since he had eaten a proper meal. She set the bowls on the table, along with a plate of bread, and gestured for him to sit. Eat first. We can talk after. Henry did not need to be told twice. He ate with the focused intensity of a truly hungry man, barely tasting the food as it went down, but grateful for every bite. The stew was good, rich with beef and vegetables, seasoned with herbs that reminded him of his mother's cooking back when he was a boy and the world was simpler. Lillian ate more slowly, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. When he had sopped up the last of the stew with a piece of bread and leaned back in his chair, she spoke. I need help running this ranch. Daniel and I had built something good here, but I cannot maintain it alone. The cattle need tending, the fences need mending, the barn roof is leaking in 3 places, and I have 100 other tasks that require a man's strength. I have been trying to do it all myself, but I am falling behind, and if I do not get help soon, I am going to lose everything Daniel worked for. Henry listened, feeling the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. Why are you telling me this? You do not know anything about me. I know you are grieving. I know you are lost. I know you have kind eyes and you treated your horse gently, and you did not look at me the way some men do, like I am prey. Lillian's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. I am offering you work, Henry. Room and board plus wages. Nothing fancy, but honest pay for honest work. If you want direction, I can give you that. If you want a reason to get up in the morning, this ranch needs you. It was the most straightforward offer Henry had received in years, maybe ever. No tricks, no hidden motives, just a woman who needed help and a man who needed purpose. He thought about refusing, about mounting Juniper and riding off into the sunset to continue his aimless wandering, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the desperation in Lillian's eyes that she was trying so hard to hide. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his own bones. Maybe it was just that he was tired of being alone with his grief. All right, he heard himself say. I will stay and help, at least for a while. Relief washed over Lillian's face like rain after a drought. Thank you, truly. I can show you the bunkhouse where you can sleep. It is not much, but it is dry and has a decent bed. You can start tomorrow after you have had a chance to rest. Henry nodded, feeling something shift inside him. It was not hope exactly, but it was something adjacent to it, a tiny spark in the darkness that had consumed him since Thomas died. He followed Lillian outside to a small building behind the main house, a simple structure with a wood stove, a bed, a chair, and a trunk for belongings. It was clean and functional, better than sleeping on the hard ground, and Henry found himself grateful in a way he had not expected. There are clean sheets in the trunk and firewood stacked outside if you get cold at night, though it does not happen often this time of year, Lillian said from the doorway. I will ring the bell at sunrise for breakfast. Do not feel obligated to join me in the house if you would rather keep to yourself. I can bring food out here. I will join you, Henry said, surprising himself again. Seems like the least I can do, given your hospitality. Lillian smiled then, a real smile that transformed her tired face into something luminous. Good. I will see you in the morning, Henry Lawson. She left him alone, and Henry sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his calloused hands and wondering what he had just agreed to. But as he lay down and felt the comfort of a real mattress beneath him, he decided that wondering was better than the empty nothingness that had been consuming him. Tomorrow he would start working. Tomorrow he would have a purpose. Tonight he would sleep. The bell rang just as the first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Henry had been awake for an hour already, unable to break the habit of rising before dawn that had been ingrained in him since childhood. He had washed up with cold water from the pump and changed into his cleanest shirt, which was not saying much, and now he walked toward the main house with his hat in his hands. Lillian was in the kitchen, moving with practiced efficiency as she fried eggs and bacon on the stove. She glanced up when he entered and nodded toward the table. Coffee is in the pot. Help yourself. The coffee was strong and black, exactly what Henry needed to shake off the last cobwebs of sleep. He poured himself a cup and sat down, watching as Lillian worked. There was something soothing about the domesticity of it, the simple ritual of making breakfast, the smell of food cooking, the warm light of morning filtering through the windows. It reminded him of better times, of his mother's kitchen in Texas before she passed, of Thomas laughing at something stupid and their father scowling but secretly pleased. Lillian brought the food to the table and sat down across from him. I thought we could start with the fences today. The south pasture has several sections that need repair, and I do not want the cattle wandering off. After that, if you are not too worn out, we can look at the barn roof. Sounds like a plan. Henry ate slowly this time, savoring the food and the strange comfort of having someone across the table from him. How big is the spread? 300 acres. We have about 100 head of cattle, 20 chickens, 2 pigs, and Juniper now makes 4 horses. Daniel had big plans to expand, but we were taking it slow, building up gradually. He was smart that way, never wanted to overextend. Lillian's voice caught slightly when she mentioned her husband, but she pushed through it. Now, I am just trying to hold on to what we built. How long have you been managing alone? 6 months, like I said. The first few months I had some help from neighboring ranchers, but they have their own places to run, and charity only goes so far. I have been doing what I can, but there are things I simply cannot handle by myself. The physical labor, the heavy lifting. I am strong, but I am not strong enough for all of it. Henry heard the frustration in her voice, the exhaustion, and something else, a fierce pride that refused to admit defeat. He understood that feeling, that stubborn determination to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. Well, you have help now. I cannot promise I will solve all your problems, but I will do my best. That is all I can ask for. They worked together throughout the morning, and Henry quickly discovered that Lillian had not been exaggerating about the state of the ranch. The fences were in rough shape, with broken rails and loose posts that needed to be reset. He worked steadily, using the tools from the barn and falling into the familiar rhythm of manual labor. Lillian worked beside him, holding posts steady while he hammered, fetching supplies, pointing out the areas that needed the most attention. She was competent and capable, not afraid to get her hands dirty, and Henry found himself respecting her more with each passing hour. By midday, the sun was brutal, beating down on them with relentless intensity. Lillian called a break and brought out a jug of cool water and sandwiches wrapped in cloth. They sat in the shade of an oak tree, eating in companionable silence while the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. You are good at this, Lillian said after a while. The work, I mean. You have done it before. All my life, my father had a small ranch in Texas. Thomas and I grew up mending fences and tending cattle. After our parents died, We sold the place and headed west. We were always moving, never settling, looking for something better. Thomas had big dreams. I just followed along. Do you regret it? The moving, the not settling? Henry thought about that, really thought about it. I do not know. Maybe. We saw a lot of country, had a lot of adventures. But we never built anything lasting, never put down roots. Maybe if we had stayed in one place, Thomas would still be alive. He got sick in Winnetka because we were living rough, not taking proper care of ourselves. If we had had a real home, a real bed, maybe the fever would not have taken him. Lillian was quiet for a long moment. You cannot think like that. You will drive yourself mad with the what-ifs. Believe me, I know. I have spent 6 months asking myself if I could have done something different the day Daniel died. If I had insisted he take a different horse, if I had gone with him, if I had somehow prevented it. But the truth is, we do not get to control everything. Sometimes terrible things happen, and all we can do is keep living. Her words struck something deep inside Henry, a truth he had been avoiding since he patted down that last shovelful of dirt on his brother's grave. How do you do it? How do you keep going when everything feels pointless? I do not know if I can explain it. Some days I wake up and I do not want to get out of bed. I do not want to face another day of struggling to keep this place running. But then I think about Daniel and everything he put into this ranch, and I think about giving up, and I realize I cannot. I will not let his dream die just because he is gone. So I get up and I do the work. And I take it one day at a time. That is all any of us can do. Henry looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a widow trying to save her ranch, but a woman of remarkable strength and courage. She had every reason to give up, to sell the place and move back east, or to a town where life would be easier. But she was fighting with everything she had to hold on to something meaningful. It was humbling and inspiring in equal measure. Thank you, he said quietly. For the work, for the food, for the conversation. I did not realize how much I needed it until now. Lillian smiled, that same luminous smile from the night before. We all need each other, Henry. That is what makes us human. Now come on, we have more fence to mend before the day is done. They worked until sunset, and by the time they finished, Henry's muscles ached in a way they had not in weeks. It was a good ache, the kind that came from honest labor, and he felt more alive than he had since Thomas died. They walked back to the house together, covered in dust and sweat, and Lillian offered him the chance to wash up at the pump while she prepared dinner. The evening meal was simpler than breakfast, just beans and cornbread. But Henry ate with appetite and gratitude. They talked more freely now, the initial awkwardness between them fading as they discovered they had more in common than either expected. Lillian told him about growing up in San Francisco, the daughter of a banker who had expected her to marry well and live a life of society parties and expensive dresses. She had met Daniel at a church social, and he had been so different from the men her father approved of, rough around the edges but kind and hard-working. They had fallen in love, despite her father's objections, married quickly, and moved to California's interior to start their ranch. Henry told her about Texas, about his childhood with Thomas, about their parents who had worked themselves to exhaustion, trying to make their small ranch profitable. He told her about the decision to head west after their father died, and their mother followed 6 months later from a broken heart. He told her about the years of drifting, of odd jobs and temporary work, of always being on the move without ever finding a place that felt like home. Maybe this could be that place, Lillian said softly when he finished, if you wanted it to be. Henry did not know how to answer that, so he just nodded and changed the subject. But later, as he lay in his bed in the bunkhouse, staring at the ceiling and listening to the night sounds of the ranch, he allowed himself to consider the possibility. Maybe he could stay here. Maybe he could help Lillian build something lasting. Maybe he could find a new purpose, a new reason to wake up in the morning. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating, and he fell asleep with it, tumbling through his mind like a stone rolling downhill. The days turned into weeks, and Henry fell into a routine that felt increasingly natural. He woke before dawn, joined Lillian for breakfast, and they planned the day's work together. Some days they mended more fences or repaired the barn roof. Other days they worked with the cattle, checking them for illness or injury, moving them to fresh pasture, marking the new calves. Lillian taught him the specific quirks of her ranch, which cattle were troublemakers and which were docile, where the best water sources were located, how to read the weather patterns in the hills. In turn, Henry brought his own expertise and experience. He showed her more efficient ways to do certain tasks, shared techniques he had learned over the years, and took on the physically demanding work that had been overwhelming her. Together, they made real progress, and the ranch began to look less like a place on the verge of collapse and more like a functioning operation. But it was not just the work that changed. Henry noticed himself laughing more, talking more, feeling more present in the world. Lillian had a sharp wit that caught him off guard, making observations about the animals or the weather, or the neighbors that were so perfectly accurate and funny that he could not help but smile. She teased him gently about his tendency to be overly serious, and he found himself teasing her back about her stubborn refusal to admit when she was tired or needed help. There were moments that felt charged with something neither of them acknowledged directly. The brush of hands when passing tools, the way Lillian's face lit up when Henry rode in from checking the far pastures. The comfortable silences that stretched between them during meals, filled not with awkwardness, but with a sense of companionship that ran deeper than words. Henry told himself it was just friendship, just the natural result of two people working closely together and relying on each other. But late at night, alone in the bunkhouse, he could not quite convince himself that was all it was. One evening in early September, nearly 6 weeks after Henry arrived, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set behind the western hills. The air had cooled slightly, carrying the first hints of autumn, and Lillian had brought out 2 cups of coffee. She sat in the rocking chair that had been Daniel's, and Henry sat on the porch steps, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "I have been thinking," Lillian said, breaking the peaceful silence. "This arrangement is working well, better than I hoped, honestly. I would like to make it more permanent, if you are willing. Not just seasonal work, but a real partnership. You would have a stake in the ranch, a share of the profits. We could expand like Daniel and I planned, maybe get more cattle in the spring, improve the breeding stock." Henry felt his heart rate pick up. A partnership. A stake in something real and lasting. It was more than he had dared hope for, but it also felt like a commitment that scared him. What if he failed? What if something happened, and he let Lillian down the way he felt he had let Thomas down, by not being able to save him? "That is a generous offer," he said carefully. "But I do not have any money to invest. I came here with nothing but a horse and the clothes on my back. I am not asking for money. I am asking for your labor, your knowledge, your commitment. This place needs 2 people to run it properly, not one person killing herself, trying to do everything. If we are partners, we can build something sustainable, something that will last." Lillian paused, then added more quietly, "I trust you, Henry. I have seen how you work, how you care for the animals, how you treat this place like it matters. That is worth more than gold to me." Henry turned to look at her, seeing the earnestness in her face, the hope that she was trying not to show too openly. He thought about the past 6 weeks, about how much better he felt now compared to the hollow shell of a man who had ridden up her driveway asking for water. He thought about Thomas and what his brother would say if he were here. Thomas would tell him to stop running, to grab hold of something good when it was offered, to build the life they had always talked about but never quite achieved. "All right," Henry said, and the words felt like a door opening. "I accept. Partners." Lillian's smile was brighter than the setting sun. She stood up and offered her hand, and Henry shook it, feeling the calluses on her palm that matched his own, the firm grip that spoke of determination and strength. They held the handshake for a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Henry felt something pass between them, an understanding that went beyond business arrangements and practical considerations. That night, Henry lay awake thinking about the future for the first time since Thomas died. He thought about expanding the herd, about fixing up the barn properly, about maybe building a second bunkhouse if they hired more help someday. He thought about seasons passing, about watching the ranch grow and thrive, about being part of something larger than himself. And if his thoughts occasionally drifted to Lillian, to the sound of her laugh and the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, well, he told himself that was just natural. They were partners now. Of course he cared about her. The partnership changed things in subtle ways. Henry felt more invested in every decision, more confident in offering opinions and suggestions. Lillian consulted him on everything from which cattle to sell to how to negotiate with the feed supplier in town. They rode into Winnetka together to purchase supplies, and Henry noticed the way people looked at them, speculating about the nature of their relationship. A widow and a cowboy working a ranch together was bound to generate gossip, but neither of them seemed particularly concerned about it. In town, Henry ran into a man named Jacob, who had worked with him and Thomas on a job 3 years prior. Jacob was surprised to see him and asked about Thomas, and Henry had to explain about the fever and the burial. Saying it out loud to someone who had known his brother made it feel more real somehow, more final, and Henry struggled to keep his composure as the memories flooded back. Lillian, who had been examining fabric at the dry goods store, appeared at his elbow and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly, and her concern was so genuine that Henry felt his throat tighten. "I will be," he managed. "Just hard sometimes, talking about him." "I know." And she did know. He could see it in her eyes, the shared understanding of grief and loss. She did not offer platitudes or try to make him feel better with empty words. She just stood beside him, a steady presence, until he had collected himself enough to finish the conversation with Jacob and continue with their errands. On the ride back to the ranch, Lillian said, "You do not have to hide your grief, you know, not from me. I understand what it is like to lose someone and feel like you have to be strong all the time." Henry kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I do not want to burden you with my problems. You have enough of your own. That is not how it works between friends or partners. We are allowed to lean on each other. That is the point of not being alone." She paused, then added, "I still cry sometimes, late at night when I am in bed and the house is too quiet. I think about Daniel and all the plans we made, all the future we will never have. It hits me in waves, and sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in it. But then morning comes, and I get up, and I keep going. Having you here has made it easier. I am not carrying everything by myself anymore." Her honesty touched something deep in Henry's chest. "It has made it easier for me, too," he admitted. "When I first got here, I felt like I was walking through fog, like nothing was real or mattered. Now I feel like I am waking up, seeing things clearly again. You gave me that, Lillian, you and this ranch. I will always be grateful for it." "We gave it to each other," she said softly, and the words hung in the air between them like a promise. October brought cooler weather and the hard work of preparing for winter. They spent long days cutting and storing hay, checking the integrity of the barn walls, making sure the cattle had access to windbreaks and shelter. Henry repaired the wood stove in the bunkhouse and stocked it with firewood, though he found himself spending more and more evenings in the main house, sitting at Lillian's table and talking long after dinner was finished. They talked about everything, deep conversations that ranged from philosophy to politics to religion. Lillian was well educated, having attended a finishing school in San Francisco, and she challenged Henry's assumptions and made him think in ways he had not in years. He discovered she had a passion for astronomy and would sometimes stand outside at night, pointing out constellations and telling him the stories behind them. He told her about his love of horses, how he could read an animal's temperament just by watching it move, how Juniper had been a wild Mustang he had gentled himself over the course of 6 months. There was a night in late October when they were sitting by the fireplace, the temperatures having dropped enough to warrant a fire, and Lillian asked him about his dreams. "What do you want, Henry? Not just for the ranch, but for your life. What would make you happy?" Henry considered the question, taking a sip of the whiskey she had poured for both of them. "I used to think I wanted adventure, new places, excitement. That is what Thomas wanted, and I went along with it. But now I think I want something different. I want stability. I want to build something that lasts. I want to wake up in the same place every day and know that I am contributing to something meaningful." He paused, then added, "I want to matter to someone." Lillian's eyes were luminous in the firelight. "You matter to me." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Henry set down his glass and looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just his business partner or his friend, but the woman who had saved him from drowning in his own grief, who had given him purpose and direction when he had none. "You matter to me, too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I think I realized until just now." They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. Then Lillian stood up and moved to sit beside him on the sofa, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I have been thinking about something," she said quietly, "about how life is short and unpredictable. Daniel and I thought we had all the time in the world, but we did not. Thomas probably thought the same thing. We do not get guarantees, Henry. We do not get to know how much time we have. What are you saying? I am saying that I care about you, more than a partner, more than a friend, and I think maybe you feel the same way about me, but we are both too cautious, too wounded, too afraid of losing someone else to acknowledge it. She turned to face him fully, her blue eyes searching his. I do not want to waste time pretending I do not feel what I feel. Life is too short for that. Henry's heart was pounding so hard he thought she might hear it. I do feel the same way. I have for a while now, but I did not think it was appropriate. You are a widow. I am just a drifter who showed up at your door asking for water. I did not want to presume or take advantage. You are not taking advantage. I am a grown woman making my own choices, and I choose this. I choose you, if you want to be chosen. Henry reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. I want that more than anything, but I need you to know that I am afraid. I am afraid of failing you, of losing you, of not being enough. I am afraid too, but I think we can be afraid together and still move forward. That is what courage is, right? Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Lillian squeezed his hand, and Henry felt something shift and settle in his chest, like a piece of himself that had been loose and rattling, finally clicking into place. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she did not. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and tentative at first, then deeper and more certain. It tasted like whiskey and hope and new beginnings, and when they finally pulled apart, Henry felt like he could breathe properly for the first time in months. Well, Lillian said, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. I suppose that settles that. Henry laughed, a real laugh that came from deep in his belly. I suppose it does. They talked late into the night, holding hands and making plans for a future that felt suddenly, wonderfully possible. They agreed to take things slowly, to let their relationship develop naturally without rushing. Lillian was still in mourning for Daniel, and Henry was still processing his grief over Thomas. But they also agreed that they had found something rare and precious in each other, and they were not going to let fear or propriety or the opinions of others stop them from pursuing it. When Henry finally walked back to the bunkhouse in the early hours of the morning, he looked up at the stars and felt Thomas's presence somehow, like his brother was watching over him and approving. I am going to be all right, he said to the night sky. I found something good, Tommy. I wish you were here to see it, but I think you would be happy for me. The wind rustled through the oak trees as if in answer, and Henry felt a sense of peace settle over him. He was still sad about losing his brother, and he always would be. But he was also ready to start living again, really living, not just surviving day to day. Lillian had given him that gift, and he was determined to be worthy of it. November brought the first frost and the realization that they needed to make a decision about living arrangements. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the fiction that they were simply business partners when everyone in the area could see how they looked at each other and how much time they spent together. Lillian's neighbors had started making pointed comments, and while neither she nor Henry cared much about gossip, they both knew that Lillian's reputation could affect her ability to do business. It was Henry who brought it up one evening after dinner. We should get married. Lillian looked up from her sewing, her eyebrows raised. Is that a proposal or a practical suggestion? Both, I suppose. I love you, Lillian. I want to spend my life with you. But I also think it makes sense from a practical standpoint. If we are married, no one can question our living arrangements or our partnership. The ranch would be ours together, legally and officially. That is possibly the least romantic proposal in the history of proposals, Lillian said, but she was smiling. Henry set down his coffee cup and came to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Let me try again. Lillian Foster, you are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You saved my life when I did not even know I needed saving. You gave me purpose and direction and a reason to believe in the future. I love you with everything I am, and I want to build a life with you, not just a ranch, but a real home and a family. Will you marry me? Lillian's eyes were shining with tears. That is much better. And yes, Henry Lawson, I will marry you. I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone again after Daniel. You have healed my heart in ways I did not think were possible. They kissed, and Henry felt a joy so pure and intense that it was almost painful. He had come to this ranch broken and directionless, and now he was engaged to a woman he adored, building a life that felt solid and real and full of promise. It seemed almost impossible that so much could change in just a few months, but here he was, and it was real. They decided to get married quickly and quietly, without a lot of fuss. Neither of them wanted a big celebration, preferring instead to mark the occasion in a simple, meaningful way. They rode into Winnetka on a crisp November morning and were married by the Justice of the Peace, with 2 witnesses pulled in from the street to make it legal. Lillian wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and Henry wore his best shirt and pants, freshly cleaned and pressed. After the ceremony, they went to the general store and bought supplies for a celebratory dinner, then rode back to the ranch as husband and wife. It felt strange and wonderful all at once, this new status, this new identity. Henry was no longer just a drifting cowboy with no ties and no future. He was a married man, a ranch owner, a partner in every sense of the word. That night, they moved Henry's belongings from the bunkhouse into the main house, into the room that Lillian had shared with Daniel. Henry felt a moment of awkwardness, wondering if it was wrong to step into a dead man's place. But Lillian sensed his hesitation and addressed it directly. "Daniel is gone," she said gently. "I will always love him and cherish the time we had together. But he would want me to be happy, to move forward with my life. And I am happy with you, Henry. This is our room now, our home, our future. We are not replacing what was, we are building something new." Her words eased the tightness in Henry's chest, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close and breathing in the scent of her hair. "I will do everything in my power to make you happy," he promised. "You already do," she whispered back. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, filled with whispered words and gentle touches, 2 wounded people finding healing and joy in each other's arms. Henry had been with women before, but never like this, never with such a profound sense of connection and rightness. They fell asleep tangled together, and Henry woke in the middle of the night to find Lillian still sleeping peacefully beside him, her face relaxed and content. He watched her for a long moment, marveling at the turn his life had taken, then pulled her closer and drifted back to sleep. The winter months were hard work, but also deeply satisfying. Henry and Lillian fell into a rhythm as a married couple, learning each other's habits and preferences, negotiating the small conflicts that inevitably arose when 2 people shared a life. Lillian liked to wake up slowly, while Henry was alert and ready to go the moment his eyes opened. Henry preferred his coffee black, while Lillian loaded hers with sugar and cream. They bickered good-naturedly over how to organize the barn and whether to sell certain cattle or keep them for breeding. But beneath the small disagreements was a foundation of love and respect that made everything else manageable. They worked together seamlessly during the day and talked for hours at night, never running out of things to say to each other. Henry told Lillian stories about growing up in Texas, about the time he and Thomas tried to tame a wild bull and ended up being chased halfway across the county. Lillian told him about her childhood in San Francisco, about sneaking out to go to the theater when her parents thought she was at church, about the first time she saw Daniel and knew instantly that he was the one. "Do you feel guilty?" Henry asked one night. "About being happy with me when Daniel has not been gone that long?" Lillian was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I remember what I told you before, that life is short and unpredictable. I loved Daniel deeply and I mourned him. I still mourn him in some ways. But I am also alive, and I deserve to be happy. We both do. Grief is not a competition or a measure of how much you loved someone. It is just part of the process of continuing to live after loss." "You are very wise," Henry said, kissing her forehead. "I have had to be. This world does not make it easy for women alone. I learned quickly that I could not afford to be weak or indecisive, but with you I can be both strong and vulnerable. That is a gift." Christmas came and went with quiet celebration. They could not afford extravagances, but Lillian made a special dinner, and Henry carved a wooden figurine of a horse for her, spending weeks in secret working on it until it was perfect. She was delighted with the gift and gave him a warm wool scarf she had knitted herself. They spent the evening by the fire, talking about the year past and the year ahead, making plans for spring and beyond. In January of 1879, Lillian discovered she was pregnant. She told Henry over breakfast one morning, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I am with child. The baby should come in late summer, around August. Henry felt his entire world tilt and reorganize itself around this new information. A baby. He was going to be a father. The thought was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Are you sure? As sure as I can be. I have missed 2 monthly courses, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. All the signs are there. She reached across the table and took his hand. Are you happy about it? Happy does not even begin to cover it, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. I am overwhelmed and scared and more excited than I have ever been about anything. We are going to have a baby, Lillian, a child of our own. They held each other for a long time, both of them crying a little, both of them marveling at the miracle of new life. Henry thought about Thomas and wished desperately that his brother could be here to meet his niece or nephew. He thought about his parents and how proud they would have been to be grandparents. But he also felt their presence somehow, like they were watching over him and blessing this new chapter of his life. The pregnancy gave them both a renewed sense of purpose and urgency. They worked hard throughout the spring to ensure the ranch was as stable and profitable as possible before the baby arrived. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the heaviest work, taking some of the burden off Henry so he could be more available to Lillian as she grew larger and more uncomfortable. Lillian was a remarkably healthy pregnant woman, but the heat of the California summer was hard on her. Henry fussed over her constantly, making sure she drank enough water and rested in the shade during the hottest part of the day. She tolerated his worrying with good humor, teasing him about being an overprotective husband, but also clearly appreciating his care and concern. In mid-August, on a sweltering afternoon, when the air was thick and still, Lillian went into labor. Henry sent Peter racing into Winnetka to fetch the midwife, a competent older woman named Mrs. Harper, who had delivered half the babies in the county. Henry stayed with Lillian, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, feeling utterly helpless as she worked through the contractions. You are doing so well, he told her, though he had no idea if that was true. He just knew he needed to say something, needed to offer some kind of encouragement. Easy for you to say, Lillian gasped between contractions. You are not the one trying to push a human being out of your body. Despite the pain she was in, Henry almost laughed at her acerbic tone. Even in labor, she was sharp and funny. I wish I could do it for you. I wish you could too. Mrs. Harper arrived and took over with calm efficiency, shooing Henry out of the room despite his protests. He paced in the front room for hours, listening to Lillian's cries and feeling each one like a knife to his heart. Childbirth was dangerous, he knew that. Women died in labor all the time, and the thought of losing Lillian was more than he could bear. But finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and red, he heard a new sound, a thin wail that made his heart stop and then race. A baby. His baby. Mrs. Harper opened the door and smiled at him. You have a son, Mr. Lawson, a healthy boy with a good set of lungs, and your wife is tired, but doing well. Henry rushed into the room and saw Lillian lying in bed, sweaty and exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him, with tears streaming down her face. Come meet your son. Henry approached slowly, almost afraid to touch the fragile new life. But Lillian placed the baby in his arms, and he looked down at the tiny face, the scrunched-up features, the impossibly small fingers. His son. He had a son. The reality of it hit him like a physical blow, and he felt tears spilling down his cheeks. He is perfect, Henry whispered. Absolutely perfect. What should we name him? I was thinking Thomas, Lillian said softly. After your brother, if that is all right with you. Henry could not speak for a moment, too choked up with emotion. Naming their son after Thomas felt right in a way he could not fully articulate, a way of honoring his brother's memory and ensuring that Thomas Lawson would not be forgotten. That is perfect. Thomas Daniel Lawson, after both of them. Thomas Daniel Lawson, Lillian repeated, testing the name. I like that. Our little Tommy. They spent the evening marveling over their son, counting his fingers and toes, watching him sleep and wake and make tiny newborn noises. Mrs. Harper stayed for a few hours to make sure both mother and baby were stable, then left with instructions for care and a promise to check in the next day. That night, with Lillian and baby Thomas both sleeping peacefully, Henry sat in the rocking chair and held his son, overwhelmed by the depth of his love for this tiny person he had just met. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, from the despair of burying his brother to the joy of welcoming his son into the world. Life was strange and unpredictable, full of both heartbreak and unexpected blessings. He had learned that the hard way, but he had also learned that even in the darkest times, there could be light if you were willing to look for it. The months after Thomas's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Henry discovered that he was surprisingly good with babies, patient and gentle despite his large, calloused hands. He walked the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, sang him lullabies in a rough but sincere voice, and changed diapers without complaint. Lillian watched him with soft eyes, clearly pleased by how naturally he had taken to fatherhood. "You are a good man, Henry Lawson," she told him one morning as he fed Thomas a bottle while she cooked breakfast. "Our son is lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Henry replied, looking down at the baby in his arms. "I never thought I would have this, a family and a home and something to fight for. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Lillian said, echoing her words from so many months ago. "That is what marriage is, what partnership is. We build together." As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. They expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, and built a reputation for quality cattle that brought buyers from across the state. Henry and Lillian worked hard, but they also made time to enjoy their life together, to play with their son, to sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunset while Thomas slept in Lillian's arms. When Thomas was 2 years old, Lillian became pregnant again. This time, it was a daughter, born on a cool October evening with far less drama than her brother's arrival. They named her Rose, and she was a calm, easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. Henry was besotted with his daughter, carrying her around the ranch and showing her everything, talking to her constantly, even though she was too young to understand. Lillian teased him about playing favorites, but Henry protested that he loved both children equally. They were just different, and he related to them in different ways. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The ranch prospered, the children grew, and Henry and Lillian's love deepened with each passing year. They had their challenges, of course, droughts and difficult winters and cattle that got sick and financial pressures that kept them up at night worrying. But they faced everything together, as a team, and that made even the hardest times bearable. One evening, when Thomas was 5 and Rose was 3, Henry found himself standing in the same spot where he had first approached the ranch 8 years earlier, asking for water for himself and his horse. So much had changed since that day. He was no longer a grieving, directionless cowboy with no future. He was a husband, a father, a rancher with roots planted deep in California soil. Lillian came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am. How different my life could have been if I had kept riding that day instead of stopping here." "I think we both got lucky," Lillian said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I was drowning when you showed up, even if I did not want to admit it. You saved me as much as I saved you." "So we saved each other." "Yes, that is exactly what we did." They stood there in the fading light, watching their children play in the yard, listening to Thomas's laughter and Rose's delighted squeals. Inside the house, dinner was waiting. A fire was crackling in the hearth, and the life they had built together continued on, solid and real and full of love. Henry thought about his brother Thomas sometimes, usually late at night when the house was quiet and he was alone with his thoughts. The grief had dulled over the years, becoming less of a sharp, cutting pain and more of a gentle ache, a reminder of what had been lost, but also what had been gained. He liked to think that his brother would be proud of him, proud of the life he had made, the family he had created. "Thank you, Tommy," he whispered to the night sky. "Thank you for bringing me here, even if you did not mean to. Thank you for the years we had together. I hope, wherever you are at peace." The wind rustled through the oak trees, and Henry felt, as he had so many times before, a sense of his brother's presence, a sense of approval and love. Then Lillian called him back inside, and he went, leaving the past behind and walking toward the future, toward the warm light of home and the people who loved him. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the cattle and following his father around the ranch. Rose was more adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring the far corners of their property, giving her parents regular heart attacks with her fearlessness. When Thomas was 8 and Rose was 6, Lillian gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel after her first husband. Henry had suggested the name, feeling it was important to honor the man who had built the foundation of their ranch and who had clearly been a good man, deserving of remembrance. Little Daniel was a happy, chubby baby who laughed easily and charmed everyone he met. The 3 children were different in temperament but close-knit, playing together and looking out for each other the way siblings should. Henry watched them with deep satisfaction, knowing that he and Lillian had created something lasting and good, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They bought adjacent land when it became available, expanding their grazing area and increasing their herd. They hired more help as needed, and Henry took great care to treat his workers fairly and with respect, remembering what it was like to be a drifting cowboy looking for honest work. Several of their hired hands stayed on for years, becoming like extended family. Lillian remained Henry's partner in every sense, continuing to work the ranch alongside him, even as she raised their children. She was a fierce mother, protective and loving, but she also maintained her own identity and interests. She started a small vegetable garden that grew into something substantial, providing food for their family and surplus to sell in town. She taught Rose to read and write at a young age, insisting that education was important, even for a girl on a ranch. She was respected in Winnetka and the surrounding area, known as a shrewd businesswoman and a pillar of the community. Henry and Lillian's marriage continued to deepen over the years. They still talked for hours, still laughed together, still found joy in each other's company. There were difficulties, of course, disagreements and stressful times and moments when they got on each other's nerves. But the foundation of love and mutual respect they had built was strong enough to weather any storm. One particularly memorable evening, when they had been married for 12 years, Henry came in from working with the cattle to find Lillian sitting at the kitchen table with a strange expression on her face. The children were playing outside, their voices carrying through the open windows, and the house smelled of the bread Lillian had baked that afternoon. "What is wrong?" Henry asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing is wrong. I just got some interesting news in town today. Do you remember Jacob, the man you ran into years ago who knew you and Thomas?" "Of course. He told me something. He said that the fever that killed Thomas, it was not random. There was an outbreak in Winnetka that summer, killed several people. The town did not have a proper doctor at the time, and people were living in close quarters without good sanitation. If you and Thomas had not been there, if you had been somewhere else, he might not have gotten sick at all." Henry sat down heavily, processing this information. He had spent so many years believing that Thomas's death was just bad luck, random chance. To learn that it could have been prevented, that different choices might have led to a different outcome, was both painful and strangely liberating. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. "Because I wanted you to know that it was not your fault. You could not have saved him, Henry. Even if you had known what to do, the fever was too severe, too widespread. And because I wanted you to understand that sometimes things happen for reasons we cannot see at the time. If Thomas had not gotten sick, if you had not been wandering and grieving, you would never have come to my ranch. We would never have met. Our children would not exist. I am not saying his death was meant to be or that it was somehow good. But I am saying that even terrible things can lead to unexpected blessings." Henry felt tears stinging his eyes. "I think about him every day. I wonder what he would have made of his life if he had lived. I know you do, and that is how it should be. We honor the people we have lost by remembering them, by carrying them with us. Your brother is part of our family, even though our children never met him. You named our oldest son after him. You tell stories about him. That keeps him alive in a way." Henry reached across the table and took Lillian's hands, holding them tightly. "I love you. I do not think I say that enough, but I do. I love you so much. I love you too, more than words can express." They sat there holding hands across the table, two people who had found each other in the midst of grief and built a life full of love and purpose. Outside, their children played, their laughter ringing out in the evening air. In the barn, the horses nickered softly. In the distance, the cattle grazed peacefully. Everything was as it should be, imperfect and beautiful and real. As their children grew older, Henry and Lillian began thinking about the future of the ranch and what would happen after they were gone. Thomas, their oldest, showed a real aptitude for ranching and seemed likely to take over the operation someday. Rose was interested in business and numbers, spending hours helping her mother with the accounts and learning how to negotiate with buyers. Daniel was still young, but he showed signs of being interested in horses, spending all his free time in the stables and begging his father to teach him everything about training and breeding. "We are raising good children," Lillian said one night as they prepared for bed. "Strong, capable, kind. I am proud of them." "You should be. You are an excellent mother." Henry pulled off his boots and stretched out on the bed. "Though I will take a little credit, too." "A little," Lillian agreed, smiling. "You are not a terrible father." "Not terrible. That is high praise." They laughed together, the easy laughter of two people who knew each other completely and were utterly comfortable in each other's presence. Later, as they lay in the darkness, Henry thought about how different his life had turned out from anything he had imagined. He had expected to spend his years drifting, following Thomas from one adventure to another, never settling down or building anything permanent. Instead, he had a wife he adored, children who made him proud, and a ranch that bore the fruits of his labor. It was not the life he had planned, but it was so much better than anything he could have planned for himself. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, spring to summer, to autumn to winter, and back again. Henry watched his children grow and change, watched them develop their own personalities and dreams. Thomas became a young man of 16, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, with a quiet competence that made Henry's heart swell with pride. Rose at 14 was sharp-tongued and brilliant, already talking about possibly going to San Francisco for school, though Henry was not sure he could bear to let her go. Daniel at 11 was all energy and enthusiasm, constantly in motion, constantly exploring. When Thomas turned 18, Henry and Lillian decided it was time to make the ranch officially his as well. They sat him down one evening and explained that they wanted to add him as a full partner, giving him a legal stake in the operation and a voice in all major decisions. Thomas was overwhelmed and honored. "Are you sure? I am still so young. I have so much to learn." "You know more than you think," Henry said, "and the best way to learn is by doing. Your mother and I are not going anywhere, but we want you to start taking on more responsibility, preparing for the day when this place will be yours." "Ours," Thomas corrected. "If I am doing this, Rose and Daniel need to be involved too. We are a family. We should build this together." Henry and Lillian exchanged glances, both of them pleased by their son's generosity and his understanding of what family meant. "That is very mature of you," Lillian said, "and I think it is a wonderful idea. When Rose and Daniel are old enough, we will do the same for them." Over the next few years, the family continued to work together, building the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the area. They weathered droughts and market downturns, celebrated good years, and supported each other through difficult ones. Henry taught his children everything he knew, and Lillian taught them everything she knew, and together they created a legacy that was greater than any one person. On a warm spring evening in 1895, 17 years after Henry first rode up to Lillian's ranch asking for water, the family gathered on the porch after dinner. Thomas was 21 now, officially engaged to a young woman from town named Sarah, whom the family adored. Rose was 19, preparing to leave for San Francisco in the fall to study business, though she promised to return and apply her education to the ranch. Daniel was 16, already showing signs of being an exceptional horseman. Henry looked around at his family, at Lillian still beautiful in her 40s, at his grown children who had turned out better than he had any right to hope for, and felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. His life had not been easy, but it had been good. He had loved and been loved in return. He had built something lasting. He had mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Lillian asked, the same question she had asked him so many times over the years. "Just how lucky I am, how grateful I am for all of this." "We are all lucky," Thomas said. "You and Mother built something incredible here. You gave us a foundation, a home, a place to belong. That is not something every child gets." "Here, here," Rose added, raising her glass of lemonade in a toast, "to the best parents anyone could ask for." They all drank, and Henry felt his throat tighten with emotion. These moments were the ones that mattered, he thought. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic events, but these quiet evenings surrounded by love, these simple acknowledgments of connection and family. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Henry and Lillian sat together on the porch swing, rocking gently and watching the stars. The night was clear and cool, perfect for sitting outside, and Henry had his arm around Lillian's shoulders, holding her close. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Lillian asked. "When you rode up asking for water?" "All the time. I think about how close I came to just riding past, how easily we could have never met. But you did not ride past. You stopped, and you asked, and you stayed. That took courage, even if you did not realize it at the time. You were the one with courage. You offered help to a stranger, invited him into your home, trusted him with your ranch and your heart. That was brave." "Maybe we were both brave," Lillian said. "Or maybe we were both just desperate and lucky enough to find each other at the right moment. I will take luck over anything else. Luck and love, that is all anyone needs." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night, the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Henry thought about his brother Thomas, about how much time had passed since that awful day when he had buried him outside Winnetka. The pain had faded but never disappeared entirely, and Henry was glad of that. It meant he had not forgotten, that Thomas still lived in his heart and memory. "I wish he could have met them," Henry said quietly, knowing Lillian would understand he was talking about his brother. "Our children, he would have loved them. I wish that too, but in a way he did meet Thomas, or at least Thomas carries his name and his legacy. That is a kind of immortality. You always know the right thing to say. That is because I am brilliant, and you are lucky to have me." Henry laughed and kissed her temple. "The luckiest man alive." The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and more blessings. Thomas married Sarah in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch, and a year later, they welcomed Henry and Lillian's first grandchild, a little girl named Emma. Henry discovered that being a grandfather was even more wonderful than being a father, all the joy with slightly less responsibility, and he spent hours holding Emma and telling her stories about the old days. Rose went to San Francisco and thrived there, becoming involved in business and making connections that would prove valuable for the ranch. She came home for holidays and summers, always bursting with new ideas and energy, always challenging her family to think bigger and reach further. Daniel took over the horse breeding side of the operation, developing a reputation for producing some of the finest working horses in California. Henry and Lillian grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving a little slower, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They took walks around the ranch in the evenings, hand in hand, talking about their children and grandchildren and the future. They sat on the porch and watched the sunset, rocking gently and remembering all the years they had shared. On their 25th wedding anniversary, in November of 1903, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Thomas and Sarah brought Emma, now 8 years old, and their 2 younger children, William and Clara. Rose had brought her new husband, a banker from San Francisco named Robert, who had fallen in love with ranch life and was considering moving permanently. Daniel had recently gotten engaged to a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, a practical young woman named Margaret, who fit into the family perfectly. The house was full of laughter and noise and love, everything that Henry and Lillian had dreamed of when they first started building their life together. They stood in the kitchen watching their family, and Lillian leaned against Henry with a contented sigh. "We did well," she said softly. "We did better than well. We did incredible. Do you have any regrets? Anything you wish you had done differently?" Henry thought about that seriously, considering the question from every angle. "No," he said finally. "Not a single one. My life has been exactly what it needed to be. The good and the bad, the joy and the sorrow, all of it led me here, to this moment, with you and our family. How could I regret any of that?" "Good answer," Lillian said, smiling up at him. "I feel the same way. Even the hard parts, even the loss and the grief, they made us who we are. They brought us together. I would not change a thing." They kissed, a sweet, lingering kiss that spoke of decades of love and partnership, and their children and grandchildren cheered and clapped. Henry felt his face flush with embarrassment, but he was also deeply happy, surrounded by the people he loved most in the world, celebrating a marriage that had surpassed all his hopes and expectations. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Henry slipped outside and looked up at the stars. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from that terrible day when he buried Thomas to this moment of complete contentment and fulfillment. He thought about all the choices he had made, the roads taken and not taken, and how they had shaped his life. "I hope you are proud of me, Tommy," he said to the night sky. "I tried to live well, to be a good man, to build something lasting. I think I did it. I hope you are at peace, wherever you are." The stars twinkled above him, distant and eternal, and Henry felt, as he always did, a sense of his brother's presence and approval. Then he turned and walked back into the house, back to Lillian and the life they had created together, leaving the past in the past where it belonged and focusing on the present and future that were still unfolding. The final years of Henry's life were peaceful and fulfilling. He gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting Thomas and Daniel to handle the work while he played with his grandchildren and enjoyed his time with Lillian. They traveled a little, taking a trip to San Francisco to visit Rose and another to Texas to see the place where Henry had grown up, now barely recognizable but still meaningful. Lillian passed away first, on a quiet morning in the spring of 1912, at the age of 60. She had been ill for several months, her body simply wearing out after years of hard work and childbearing. Henry sat beside her bed, holding her hand as she slipped away, and though he knew it was coming, the loss was devastating. She had been the center of his world for over 3 decades, his partner and his love, and without her, he felt untethered and lost. But he had his children and grandchildren to remind him that life continued, that Lillian's legacy lived on in the family they had created together. He mourned her deeply, but did not let the grief consume him the way it had when Thomas died. He had learned over the years that grief was something you carried, not something you defeated, and he made space for it while still living fully. Henry lived for another 6 years after Lillian's death, surrounded by his family, watching his grandchildren grow and his children thrive. He spent his days puttering around the ranch, offering advice when asked, but mostly just enjoying the sunshine and the satisfaction of seeing the life he and Lillian had built continue to flourish. On a warm August evening in 1918, at the age of 68, Henry Lawson passed away peacefully in his sleep. His children found him in the morning, lying in the bed he had shared with Lillian for so many years, a slight smile on his face, as if he had seen something pleasant in his final moments. They buried him next to Lillian in the small cemetery on the ranch property, under an oak tree that provided shade and shelter. At the funeral, Thomas stood before the assembled family and friends and spoke about his father. He talked about Henry's kindness and strength, his dedication to family, and his unwavering work ethic. He talked about how Henry had come to the ranch as a broken, grieving man and had transformed himself into someone strong and whole, building a life of meaning and purpose. He talked about the love between Henry and Lillian, a love that had sustained them through decades and would continue to inspire their descendants for generations to come. "My father taught me that it is never too late to start over," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "He taught me that grief and loss do not have to define us, that we can choose to keep living and loving even after our hearts have been broken. He taught me about partnership and commitment, about what it means to build something lasting. Most of all, he taught me about love, true love, that endures through everything life throws at you. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I am grateful beyond words for the time we had together and the example he set." After the funeral, as the sun set behind the western hills and the family gathered on the porch of the ranch house, Rose raised a glass in a final toast. To Henry and Lillian Lawson, who built something beautiful out of grief and loss, who showed us all what it means to truly live. May we honor their memory by continuing the work they started and loving each other the way they loved each other. May this ranch and this family continue to thrive for generations to come. To Henry and Lillian, everyone echoed, drinking deeply and feeling the weight of legacy and love settle on their shoulders. The ranch did continue to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own contributions and innovations while honoring the foundation that Henry and Lillian had built. The story of the cowboy who wandered after burying his brother and found direction from a widow became family legend, told to children and grandchildren, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope and love can still find us if we are open to receiving them. And so, the legacy lived on, a testament to 2 people who had met by chance and built a life by choice, who had turned grief into growth and loss into love. The ranch stood as their monument, but their true legacy was in the family they created, the values they instilled, and the love that continued to ripple outward through time, touching lives they would never meet but whose existence was only possible because on a hot August day in 1878, a grieving cowboy stopped at a widow's ranch to ask for water and decided to stay.